When I graduated law school, I took about a half a year off or so, half a year to a year. And then I started deciding, well, I got to do something with my life. So at the time, um, there was no internet. This was in like 1886, 87. So I went to Rutgers Law Library, went to the Law Journal, and see what was being uh, offered in terms of employment. And at that point, I knew I wanted to go into work for legal services. Now back then, the budgets were much, much smaller. The staff, the number of people that were employed was much smaller. And but I saw that there was an opening that was being advertised in Atlantic City at what was then called Cape Atlantic Legal Services. I grew up in North Jersey. I thought South Jersey started and ended at Toms River. So I decided, all right, I'll give it a shot. I've been to Atlantic City maybe 3 or 4 times before then. I do remember driving down the Parkway, and when I got to like around Egg Harbor Township, I thought I was in a different state because I really had never spent a lot of time other than maybe Wildwood on the shore, in the more of the mainland areas of South Jersey. Because when I went down there, I drove around just to see the area, and there was a lot of farmland, and there was a lot of open space, the pinelands. Wasn't the New Jersey like the Turnpike and the Route 9 where I grew up. But when I came to Atlantic, when I drove in, because I also had passed the New York bar, so I wasn't sure whether I wanted to practice in New York or in New Jersey. And I decided when I came to Atlantic City that this is where I wanted to work, because at the time, this was before Atlantic City did a makeover. There was much more foot traffic, and there were a lot of more people that you can tell were in poverty or desperate on the street at the time. And to me, the disparity of wealth was so striking that you had these casinos lined up on the boardwalk that were facing away from the city. Their main entrances are face the shore for the most part. And it just seemed like they were just completely cut off from the rest of the city. It reminded me immediately when I was growing up at 15 in driving up Springfield Avenue, but this was even more of a stark contrast. And so I decided that in New York, there's a lot of people, New York City particularly, a lot of legal services type attorneys, public interest lawyers. There's in New Jersey, in South Jersey, there was virtually no one doing this type of work other than legal services at the time. So I decided, after I had a favorable interview, I decided I would take the position there. And at the time, it felt almost like an outpost because, trying to think back so many years ago, I think the highest tech we had at the time were fax machines, and they just come out a few years earlier. L&J was still using, I think, mimeographs. If anyone remembers what that was on construction paper for the L&J looking out, so we would get them in the mail, stapled, and it was, and there was no internet, there was no email, there was no electronic research, so it was really on one level there was a feeling of almost being isolated because there wasn't the networking that we have now, at least electronically. But at that time, though, L&J, the support staff, it was much, much, much smaller than at the time. But I remember Felipe Chavana was doing the housing at the time, and I was probably on the phone with him 2 or 3 times a week. And that was a lifeline because although we we couldn't send something out to a listserv to get a copy of a document, or if anyone had any experience this type of issue. Ellis&J at the time was extremely available by phone to help talk through cases. Harris David as well at the time. Those were the two attorneys at the time that I really got to know real well through working at Cape Atlantic. But also the attorneys at Cape Atlantic also, when I first started there, there were some attorneys there that had been there for a number of years. They were committed to do the work. Our executive director at the time, Paul Mohair, had been in legal services right from the start when it was created in the late 70s, early 80s. So it was a good experience working there, because although on the one hand it could have felt isolated, there still was I was still able to feel like it was part of a larger movement even back then, before instant communication. I mean, Ellis&J played a very big part in that, because there was still extensive trainings going on, the housing task force, and we would meet on a regular basis. We'd have to drive up to, at that point it was New Brunswick, wasn't Edison, but it was a way that people would want to go to those meetings, because we didn't have the instantaneous communication we have today. So going to those meetings on a regular basis was very inspiring, because that was a way to interact with people individually who are doing the same things that you're doing, I was doing at the time, and it was a way to feel being part of a much larger movement towards justice.